What's going on, everybody? And in this week's lesson, we're going to check out some diminished triads, as well as one of my favorite diminished arpeggio patterns. All right? So, triads tend to be a very weak point for many guitar players, and they can be very boring to practice. But the benefits of knowing your triads, the triad shapes, and the different chord qualities, i.e. major, minor, diminished, can go a long way just for fretboard visualization and starting to understand our instrument, okay? So I'm in standard tuning. Links for any of the tabs are down in the description below, so let's jump right in. So first, let's just talk about some basic minor shapes, and then we can show you how to change to a major shape, a diminished shape, okay? So if I play A minor, what guitar player doesn't like A minor? I'm gonna be up here in root position. Little chord right here, top three strings, 14, 13, and then 12 on the high string. These notes are A, C, and E. This is an A minor triad, right? If I were to make it major, it would be 14, 14, 12. Right? This is root position, so that means, for those of you who don't know, that means the name of the chord A is in the lowest note, and all chords are built using a root note, a third, and a fifth. And really fast, for those who don't understand what that means, if my root note is an A, B, C. C would be the third, D, E would be the fifth. So these notes are A, C, and E. Okay, so we have the major chord, 14, 14, 12. And to make a major chord minor, we have to lower the third by one step or one fret. So our pinky 14 goes down to 13, and that gives us right here. Now, the diminished is a flat 5. Some of you might recognize that from, say, a blues scale, because it's the same interval, right? So if my fifth is on top, I have to flatten it or lower it by one. That's going to give me the diminished triad, okay? So that's how you formulate a diminished triad. And just like triads have inversions, so do the diminished triads, okay? So we're going to take a look at A minor in its positions. So we can come down here, it's 5, 5, 5. That's one of three shapes. We can go up to 8th position, and it's 9, 10, 8. And then we also have the 14, 13, 12. Okay, so now we're gonna build the diminished triad basically half step below A. That would give us, okay, and if we follow the same formula, root, third, fifth, G sharp, right, G, A, B, our third would be B, C, D, our fifth would be D. And if we come down here, this note is, and we have that chord shape. Some of you might recognize that. Say you've played a D chord before, and you've learned how to play a D7 chord. There it is, shape, because there's the diminished triad inside a 7th chord. And we'll talk about that a little bit, right? So one version is 4, 3, 4. If I come up here, I have 7, 9, 7. And then if I come up here, it's G sharp, B, and D. 13, 12, and 10. Okay? So there's our diminished triad shape. So I can play A minor. And that's how those relationships are right next to each other, right? Now, as I mentioned before, practicing our triads can be a little boring and a little unfulfilling depending on what style of music we tend to play most of the time. So I always find it a good way to practice this is just to be a little musical. And so here's a little vamp, right? Going back and forth between a couple chords, and we're basically gonna vamp on A minor and move to the diminished sound, right? So I can do something like, right? Just a little rhythm, and you can go through that on every chord shape just to see that, right? And then maybe you can start developing some very simple ideas based on the arpeggio shapes through those diminished chords, right? So I can go. Something like that, right? Just kind of making some stuff up, and you can use those shapes to be melodic and craft melody through smooth voice leading. So before we move on to some of the bigger or larger arpeggio shapes, one thing that I do want to point out about these triads is that they are symmetrical, right? So that means I can take the same thing, and diminish is built on stacking thirds, so I can basically take the same shape and move it minor thirds or 4 frets on the guitar, right? So if I'm on this chord shape, 13, 12, 10, I can go just move it backwards here, and then here, and then here. Right? And it's basically just those notes repeating in the different voicings. That also means the other two shapes also work. I can do the same thing with those. So that's a cool little trick. If you're playing something and you don't want to find all these shapes, I can just take that same shape and move it symmetrically. All right? All right, so that's enough about some tiny triad shapes. Let's move on to some fun arpeggios and bigger arpeggios, right? Some of my favorite. Now, back in the day, learning how to sweep, basically, I preferred 2 minor chord shapes, right? So if I'm on A minor, A is 12 on the 5th string, right? I like this shape. That was great for sweeping practice. This is not a sweeping lesson, but it's a nice arpeggio, right? So if I'm on kind of this minor bar chord shape, I'll move it down here just so maybe we can be a little more comfortable in our hands. This 5th string minor bar chord. Basically, you have 2 triads stacked in a row, but we have to add a note to do that. So I'm gonna play, and then just the rest of that chord. So it's okay? That is a minor arpeggio, and it's the same thing twice. We have root note, 3rd, 5th, root note, 3rd, 5th. Hopefully you can hear that. Those are the same notes, just repeating an octave higher. So those are kind of the framework that we can play with from a minor sound, and then we can go into my favorite diminished arpeggio shape. So let's talk about that, all right? If I'm on 2, we're stacking minor thirds here, right? So I can go 2 to 5, which is a horizontal or linear kind of thing on 1 string, minor third, 4 frets, 2, 5. And then I go string, and that inverted power chord shape, that is a minor third, right? So I'm just moving through those shapes. So it's, and then I have to shift back. Okay. And I love that kind of pattern because it's essentially it's a 2-1-2 arpeggio, right? Very cool. It tends to be very fluid and fast once you get comfortable with it. Now, one of the cool things with the diminished chord is that it's symmetrical, so you can just repeat it every minor third or every 4 frets. So if I can do this arpeggio on 2, I can move up 4 frets to 5, and I can do the same thing. I get the same group of notes. I can go to 8. I can go up to 11. Right? And I get 4 arpeggios, but it's all the same pattern, all of the same notes. And then you can, connect them like that. love that shape, one of my favorite shapes. It's super fast and super fluid. So again, if I'm playing, right, I can find that diminished chord basically on both sides of my minor bar chord, right? Which is really cool. So again, it allows me to kind of intertwine those two ideas smoothly. Very fun stuff like that. All right, so there's a nice little introduction to your diminished triads, some of my favorite arpeggio shapes. Down in the description below, you can find a link to the tabs. And as always, let me know what you come up with. So until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.